Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. We're all rethinking our relationship to masks now that the state's mask mandate is expiring next month. School districts and families have some big decisions to make about how to move forward. Dr. Dimitri Christakis is here to help us sort through the details. But first, let's get you caught up. A state advisory group decides today whether to recommend the COVID-19 vax be added to the list of mandatory vaccines for school kids. It's the second work session for the State Board of Health Technical Advisory Group. After the vote, the Board of Health can accept or reject the advice. Exemptions to the vaccine requirement will also be considered. There's a new owner in the works at King 5 TV. Seattle Times reports New York-based hedge fund Standard General has agreed to acquire its current owner. It's been 30 years since the station was owned by Seattle's Bullitt family, who founded it. Current owner Tegna, formerly Gannett, has owned King 5 since 2013. The $5.4 billion deal still needs approval from regulators and Tegna shareholders. And you better make your reservations now because it is about to get a lot harder to grab a seat at some of the city's best restaurants. 16 spots were honored with nominations for this year's James Beard Awards. They're like the Oscars, but for food. 11 chefs, 4 restaurants, and 1 baker. In just a few weeks, students and teachers won't be required to wear masks in the classroom, at least not by Washington State. But in ending the mandate, the governor also left the decision whether to mask or not up to individual schools and districts. This is a lot for students who've been masking for the past 2 years. We called a few to hear what they're thinking about getting rid of masks.
I do not want to keep on wearing masks because if I could see everyone else without masks, I'd feel more welcome.
I do want to keep wearing a mask at school, even though on the inside I wish I didn't have to. I just know that it's for the best for the safety of not only myself, but my teachers, the staff at school, and my classmates.
I want to keep wearing my masks because it keeps me safe. And I want to keep being safe because my baby brother isn't vaccinated.
For now, it's a bit early to lift the mandate. So yeah, if my friends and my classmates weren't wearing masks, I probably wouldn't want to go to school in person and would look for a way to opt out and go to online school.
I don't really like to wear masks at school because I keep running and it keeps getting wet and wet.
If my friends and classmates weren't wearing masks to school, I think I would feel really weird and uncomfortable that their spit and germs are going everywhere around the school when they talk or breathe. I think it would be really uncomfortable for me.
Wow, we heard a lot there. You know, parents and students have so much to think through as we move into this next phase. Dr. Dimitri Christakis is here to talk through all of these decisions with us. He's a professor of pediatrics and directs the Center for Child Health, Behavior, and Development at Seattle Children's. Dimitri, really good to have you back again. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's a pleasure to be back, Patricia. Thanks.
You know, masks were seen as critical to controlling the spread of COVID, and now we're being told it's okay to take them off in some cases. How should people really be thinking about masking right now?
Yeah, it's no one wants children to return to some sense of normalcy more than I do, and I totally get where the kids that want to get rid of them want to get rid of them, and where the kids are worried about it. I think probably the best message we can have for ourselves and for our children going forward is that masks need to be looked at like a clothing accessory, kind of the way we think of raincoats, although we don't usually wear raincoats in Seattle. There are times when we need them and there are times when we don't. So let's think about how we dress for school each day, and is it a mask day or is it not? Because I think part of what's really confounding for parents and frankly for children is the whipsaw. If we take them away and bring them back without preparing people for it, I really worry that the wrong messaging will be conveyed, that we're back to square one and we have to be suddenly panicked as if the pandemic has started all over again. So I think we need to make wearing masks kind of like an article of clothing.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. And also the analogy about the raincoat, about thinking about masks like a clothing accessory that we may or may not need on different days. If I could ask you to continue with that analogy, how do you see the COVID weather report at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the COVID weather report is right now looks pretty good, or at least we're looking forward to potentially a spring, if not an early summer. But all of this can change. In Seattle, we don't predict the weather more than a week in advance. In fact, if you go out a couple of days, you're taking a lot of risks. But we should take every opportunity we can to try to give ourselves some sense of normalcy, as I said before. So I do think it's safe to start walking back mask mandates carefully and other impingements on our lives. But we have to be prepared for what the future holds. We're at the tail end of Omicron, and the next two letters of the Greek alphabet are P and Rho, and unfortunately they may be around the corner.
Okay. So we are also, Dimitri, at a place where we have more information about some of the concerns about the negative impacts of kids wearing masks. We heard a lot about that at the beginning of the pandemic. What have we learned about the health impacts of wearing a mask?
We were concerned about a lot of impacts, but we've learned a lot in the past 2 years from studies that have been done. We've learned, for example, that children are able to read emotions quite well, even in masked individuals. And the studies that have looked at that have actually looked at static images, so showing children pictures of grown-ups either wearing or not wearing masks and asking them what emotion is being displayed. And they do a very good job, even with masks. And of course, what's missing in a static image is the grown-up actually talking, expressing tone. So the eyes actually reveal quite a bit. We also know that children have adapted quite well to wearing masks. We thought many of them wouldn't wear them correctly, and many of them would object to it and have behavioral issues. That all has not turned out to be the case.
It's really interesting how culturally, in some ways, we have adapted to wearing masks. And it's filled in some spaces for some people as well with anxiety. They feel a little more comfortable behind that mask.
They do, and I heard it in one of your children there who said, I don't like the fact that germs and spit are getting everywhere when someone isn't wearing a mask. I think we have to keep in mind, particularly for young children, after 2 years of mask wearing, that is their life. It's going to be an adaptation for them to think about not wearing a mask. And we have to be prepared for them to push back against it, right? If you're a 4-year-old today, you've spent 50% of your life wearing a mask and probably 80% of your kind of sentience, the period of time that you actually remember, has been when you were wearing a mask. It's going to feel weird not to wear one in public.
Quite a few local school districts told us they're waiting for clearer guidelines from the Department of Health, which will come on March 7th before they decide what they're going to be doing. But Seattle Public Schools has already decided that people will still be required to wear masks on school grounds. Bellevue and Renton school districts say they're going to get rid of their mask requirements. I am curious what you think about this every district for itself approach.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's confusing to parents, but also one of the things that makes a certain amount of sense if it's done the right way. The truth is that statewide mandates doesn't have the level of granularity that we need because the incidence of COVID and the hospital capacity vary widely, even within counties, let alone across states. And so what really should be driving the decision is the most proximal data that you have. What is the community transmission? What is the community positivity? But the important thing is that it's driven by science and not by politics. So to go back to our weather analogy, you should listen to a meteorologist, not to your Facebook friend when you're deciding whether or not to wear a raincoat. And you should listen to a local public health expert, not to your Facebook friend, not to your relative, about whether or not masks are appropriate for your child to wear. And as a parent, it's perfectly reasonable for you to decide for personal reasons that you really do want your child to continue to wear a mask. And it's equally important as a parent that you tell your children, do not make fun of other children for wearing masks any more than you would make fun of them for anything that they're wearing, any article of clothing.
I'm so glad you brought this up because the school district can make a decision about what it thinks should be going on in its buildings, but families could very easily be on the other side of that decision one way or another. How would you advise families who may be in schools where they don't agree with the approach? How should they advise their children, and how should they approach masks?
Well, first of all, they should absolutely follow whatever rules or regulations their schools have, and they shouldn't treat this any differently than they treat any other rule or regulation that schools have. I think that's incredibly important, not just for civil discourse, but also to communicate to your children that rules are rules. I should just point out, I'm in Palm Springs, and I flew here from Seattle, thankfully a short flight, trying to avoid the Seattle cold, and it was rainy when I got here. But on the plane, 2 rows in front of me was a gentleman who wasn't wearing a mask the whole ride. It bothered me, and he was on the tarmac, and I said, sir, you really should be wearing a mask for the safety of everybody around you. And he just looked at me immediately with his mask down and said, F you. And I was totally taken aback. And my wife said to me, well, what did you say back? And I said, I didn't have a civil retort to that. I could have said F you too, but that just wouldn't have served any purpose.
But this speaks to a larger issue. We talked about how to handle this discussion in your family and how you can advise your children if the rules aren't exactly where you would want to be. But Dimitri, it all goes down on the playground, man. Kids go to school and anxiety is real and bullying is real. Socially, the choice that a school makes is going to have effects on the student population no matter what.
Absolutely. And schools need to position the same, like we talked about. They need to be anti-bullying for everything. And they need to be promoting an environment that's inclusive and respectful of individual choices. But choices that put the public health and safety first. So choosing not to wear a mask when masks are required is different than choosing to wear a mask when masks are not required. To put those as being equivalent is a false equivalence.
And we all need some grace during this
time
of transition.
Absolutely.
Because Lord knows, Dimitri, we could be back to masks in a couple of months.
I'm knocking on wood and hoping that's not the case, but we may very well be there.
Dr. Dimitri Christakis, pediatrics professor and director of the Center for Child Health, Behavior, and Development at Seattle Children's. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Claire McGrane produced today's show with help from Diana Opong. And we heard from Brody, Ari, Milena, Eva, Elena, Antonio, and Jennifer during the show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy.